Scene 6. It is about 2 a.m. on the same evening. Scene 6 is a sister scene to Scene 9, later in A Streetcar Named Desire. Both scenes pivot around the relationship between Mitch and Blanche. If we look at the very end of Scene 5, look who's coming, my rose and cavalier, bow to me first, now present them our merci. Blanche is speaking gaily. Mitch has appeared around the corner with a bunch of roses. She presses the roses to her lips and then beams at herself consciously. There's a contrast between the way that Scene 5 ended and then several hours later the way that Scene 6 begins. Notably, Williams omits the actual sequence of their date with one another in this play and instead shows us the aftermath, indeed the fallout from their date. The contrast constitutes itself in Blanche's voice and manner having utter exhaustion to them, so it seems as though the date has been something which has taken its toll on Blanche. She seems utterly exhausted from the energy that's been required for the date with Mitch. Mitch, meanwhile, is described as being depressed. Interestingly, both characters on their date have been to an amusement park, which we might argue is suggestive of that notion that both of these characters are infantile in their characterization, stifled in terms of their development as adults. And symbolism is also employed by Tennessee Williams. Mitch is holding a plaster statuette of Mae West in his hands as the scene begins, which Williams tells us is a sort of prize which is won at shooting galleries. Mae West was a famous actress of the era who gained notoriety for becoming an early sex symbol in American culture. Mae West popularized a certain provocative portrayal of female sexuality in public culture. She was known for her sort of wild and outlandish personality and dress sense. And the symbolism here of Mae West, an actresses play parts, embodied in this statue which Mitch is holding as a prize, he clutches it, I think reflects that notion of Blanche Dubois in this play. Blanche herself is a prototype, or rather a imitation of Mae West, and the way that Mitch clutches this prize is the way in which he wants to clutch Blanche as his prize. Blanche stopping lifelessly. Well, Mitch laughs uneasily. So you notice all the way throughout this sequence, before they actually crack the issue and bring it into the open for a discussion, there is this sort of awkward and fragile, vulnerable sort of nature to both characters. I guess it must be pretty late, says Mitch, and you're tired. Even the hot tamale man has deserted the street, and he hangs on till the end. Mitch laughs uneasily again. How will you get home? Asks Blanche. I'll walk over to Bourbon and catch an owl car, says Mitch, and Blanche, laughing grimly, is that Streetcar Named Desire still grinding along the tracks at this hour? This symbolic reference to the title of the play and this notion of a streetcar named Desire grinding along the tracks even at this hour evokes the centrality of the theme of desire in this play. The idea that desire is something which grinds along even in the early hours of the night indicates to us that Williams is really interested in exploring the extents and limits of desire and the ways in which that can affect characters' behaviour. So in response to Blanche's question about the streetcar named Desire grinding along the tracks at this hour, you'll notice that Mitch heavily, I'm afraid you haven't got much fun out of this evening, Blanche. I spoiled it for you. So the use of the verb spoiled, I think, is significant. So something, in other words, has gone untoward in their date with one another, though it's not yet been named exactly what has happened that's caused conflict in this relationship. And conflict in relationships is something that we have been observing since the beginning of this play. A conflicted relationship between Blanche and Stella, between Stella and Stanley, Blanche and Stanley, Blanche and Mitch now, Mitch and Stanley, Steve and Eunice, and so on and so forth. No, you didn't, but I felt all the time I wasn't giving you much entertainment. I simply couldn't rise to the occasion. That was all. I don't think I've ever tried so hard to be gay and made such a dismal mess out of it. I get 10 points for trying. I did try. So notice here in front of you the highlighted sequences for both characters. I think ironically demonstrates you why Blanche and Mitch are such a good fit for one another. They share very many of the same personality characteristics, both of them apologetic, both of them self-blaming, both of them aware of one another's emotions in this sequence, but unable to address the elephant in the room and state explicitly what the issue was. Mitch asks Blanche, "Why did you try if you didn't feel like it, Blanche?" And Blanche gives us what I think for her is a key idea in this text. She says, "I was just obeying the law of nature." And he asks, what law is that? The one that says the lady must entertain the gentleman or no dice. These two lines, I think, go to the heart of Blanche's characterization as somebody who upholds a traditionalistic, indeed patriarchal worldview, whose old-fashioned ideals, as she calls them, whose desire to deceive Mitch, as she mentioned in the scene before, and to present herself as prim and proper, percolates the fabric of this text. For Blanche, the law of nature is that lady must entertain gentlemen. So in other words, ladies have a duty to entertain a man. Indeed, she sees the purpose of women as playthings for men, the purpose or role of women as something to provide entertainment, gratification and pleasure for men. And I think this is a nice moment in the play in which you can access that idea about how Blanche sees women in relation to men, and maybe it goes some way to explaining why she was so traumatized and hurt and inflicted and suffered so vividly in what she perceived as the very real betrayal of her husband Alan Gray at a young age. Perhaps she's forever thinking that she was not able to entertain him, and thus he engaged in a sexual affair to entertain himself. See if you can locate my door key in this purse. When I'm so tired, my fingers are all thumbs. Just a quick note on this. Blanche attributes tiredness as the thing which makes all of her fingers thumbs. And I would be inclined to read this as a euphemism. To be so tired in this context, I think means drunk. Mitch will acknowledge this shortly, that Blanche has been drinking quite heavily over the course of the day evening. And we know that Blanche drinks to calm her nerves, and certainly a lot of anxiety has been triggered over the course of this date with Mitch. Is this it? No, honey. That's the key to my trunk, which I must soon be packing. You mean you are leaving here soon? I've outstayed my welcome. This it? The music fades away. Eureka. Honey, you open the door while I take a last look at the sky. She leans on the porch rail. He opens the door and stands awkwardly behind her. So, earlier in the text, we get this notion of Blanche as somebody who has these superstitious beliefs. In the scene before, she asked Stanley about his astrological star sign. Now she reads the stars in the sky and the symbolism which is attached to them. I'm looking for the seven sisters, she says, but the girls are not out tonight. Oh yes, there they are, God bless them. All in a bunch going home from their little bridge party. So you see, this is a good indication for you, perhaps not of her superstitious state of mind, but this sort of infantile quality to Blanche, the way in which she interprets things in the world from a sort of naive, girlish, childlike perspective. You get the door open? Good boy. I guess you want to go now, she says, semi-flirtatiously, semi-suggestively. He shuffles and coughs a little. Can I, kiss you goodnight? Why do you always ask me if you may? I don't know whether you want me to or not. Why should you be so doubtful? She asks again. And he says, that night when we parked by the lake and I kissed you, honey, it wasn't the kiss I objected to. I liked the kiss very much. It was the other little familiarity that I felt obliged to discourage. I didn't resent it, not a bit in the world. In fact, I was somewhat flattered that you desired me. But honey, you know as well as I do that a single girl, a girl alone in the world, has got to keep a firm hold on her emotions or she'll be lost. If we first talk about Mitch, you can see he has difficulty in interpreting Blanche's behaviour, emotions and actions. Repeatedly he asks her, as she acknowledges, if he may kiss her. And that also strikes a contrast with the ways in which Blanche is treated by other men, namely Stanley, in this play. Coupled with this, Mitch mentions the night when they parked by the lake and he kissed her. Now, remember that the lake, and being by a lake, is a particularly triggering experience for Blanche, because it was by the lake that Alan Gray shot himself, as will be revealed shortly. What she objected to, however, is of importance, I think, to the characterization of Blanche in this play and the presentation of sexual relations. Euphemistically, she talks about the other little familiarity that she felt obliged to discourage. Now, euphemistically, there is an ambiguity over what that other little familiarity constituted. We can assume that there was something sexual in nature with regards to this familiarity. Perhaps Mitch started to run his hand up the length of her leg and under her skirt, or something along those lines. But simply put, what's interesting about this sequence is both Blanche feeling flattered at being desired, and now we think of her notion that soft people have got to court the favours of hard people. This notion that a woman has got to be seductive, as she has put forward before. So she's flattered at having been desired. But she says that a girl alone in the world has got to keep a firm hold on her emotions, or she'll be metaphorically lost. So in other words, what Blanche is doing is she is reiterating the concept of a reputation for a woman in the context of this play as something which is of pivotal importance. Part of the reason why Blanche has confessed seeking protection and running from one leaky roof to another leaky roof in the previous scene, she told Stella that she'd not been awfully good lately. She told Stella about the fact that she had had multiple relationships with different men, looking to create temporary magic to keep herself in a state of protection. I think she's acknowledging that idea here, that her reputation now in particular is of ultimate concern to her, and so she has to keep a firm hold of her emotions or she'll be lost. Lost? I guess you are used to girls that like to be lost, the kind that get lost immediately on the first date. So again, you can see here she's addressing this idea of what it means to be lost, and she's implying women that are too easy or too quick to engage in sexual activities with men. And this is something which Blanche, wanting to deceive Mitch and present herself as prim and proper, allegedly is quite consciously attempting to prevent from materializing. I like you to be exactly the way you are, says Mitch, because in all my experience, I have never known anyone like you. So these two statements of Mitch's, again, there's no doubt that Mitch is infatuated with Blanche and likes her a lot. But you can see that Blanche here cannot accept these declaratives of Mitch's. She can't accept his assertions that he likes her exactly the way that she is, and that he's never known anyone like her. She looks at him gravely and then bursts into laughter and claps a hand to her mouth. So I think, again, it's indicative for you of the type of mentality that Blanche has and the self-image that she has produced of herself. She's unable to accept the compliment, unable to engage with Mitch at a very sincere and straightforward level. Are you laughing at me? No, honey. The lord and lady of the house have not yet returned, Stanley and Stella, so come in. We'll have a nightcap. Let's leave the lights off, shall we? And Mitch, slightly stunned by her behaviour, you just do what you want to, he says, as they go into the apartment. So you can see with Mitch, he's had difficulty interpreting Blanche's actions, difficulty understanding her emotions, difficulty parsing her voiced sentiments, and he acknowledges that she just does whatever she wants. She's kind of unpredictable and there's a wildness to her. Blanche precedes him into the kitchen. The outer wall of the building disappears and the interiors of the two rooms can be dimly seen. The other room's more comfortable. Go on in. This crashing around in the dark is my search for some liquor. So I'll remind you now, earlier in the scene, Blanche's fingers are all thumbs. She can't find her keys in her bag. And Mitch's question, you want a drink, is heavy with implication. In other words, he's implying, do you not think that you've drank enough already? I want you to have a drink, she exclaims. And now they begin to acknowledge what's been evident from the beginning of the scene. You have been so anxious and solemn all evening. So have I. We have both been anxious and solemn, and now for these last few remaining moments of our life, I want to create joie de vivre. I'm lighting a candle. That's good. We are going to be very bohemian. We are going to pretend that we are sitting in a little artist cafe on the left bank in Paris. She lights a candle stub and puts it in a bottle. So she starts to speak French to Mitch, and you can look at the translation of this in your own time. I just want to analyse the fact that Blanche often switches into French when speaking to Mitch, such as in scene 3 and at the end of scene 5, as a form of flirtation and as a form of reinforcing the stereotype of herself as a cultivated and cultured, desirable, sort of prim and proper woman. Voulez-vous coucher avec moi? Ce soir, will you sleep with me? Funnily enough. I mean, it's a damn good thing. I found some liquor, just enough for 2 shots without any dividends, honey. That's good. She enters the bedroom with the drinks and the candle. Sit down. Why don't you take off your coat and loosen your collar? I better leave it on. No, I want you to be comfortable, says Blanche. I am ashamed of the way I perspire, says Mitch. My shirt is sticking to me. Perspiration is healthy. If people don't perspire, they would die in 5 minutes. She takes his coat from him. So we have a slightly sort of comedic but also interesting sequence between Blanche and Mitch here. Blanche attempts to make Mitch feel as comfortable as she possibly can. And Mitch is self-conscious, like Blanche is self-conscious, so he's self-conscious of his perspiration, of sweating. Blanche immediately moves to make him feel comfortable. And this is quite a hilarious exchange between them. She compliments him. This is a nice coat. What kind of material is it? They call that stuff alpaca. Oh, alpaca. It's very lightweight alpaca. Oh, lightweight alpaca. I don't like to wear a wash coat, even in summer, because I sweat through it. Oh, says Blanche. So you can see with Mitch, he's not the most elegant. He's not the most elegant of characters. Alpaca is a cheap material. Again, he's talking about sweating through his wash coat, so he doesn't even like to wear one of those. Certainly a gross quality to Mitch, and he's very childish in his temperament. And it don't look neat on me. A man with a heavy build has got to be careful of what he puts on him, so he don't look too clumsy. So again, you see the self-consciousness of Mitch. He's aware of the fact that he perspires a lot, so he keeps his jacket on. He's aware of the fact that Blanche has not had a very good night. And that it's because of him. He's aware of his heavy build. He's aware of the fact that he would look clumsy, depending on what he wore. You are not too heavy, says Blanche. You don't think I am? You are not the delicate type. You have a massive bone structure and a very imposing physique. So again, Blanche attempting to make Mitch feel more comfortable and secure. Thank you, he says. Last Christmas, I was given a membership to the New Orleans Athletic Club. Oh, good. It was the finest present I ever was given. I work out there with the weights and I swim and keep myself fit. When I started, I was getting soft in the belly, but now my belly is hard. It is so hard now that a man can punch me in the belly and it don't hurt me. Punch me. Go on, see. She pokes lightly at him. Gracious. Okay. So this is almost regressing into a childlike exchange. Mitch's language here about the finest present he was ever given and the way that he works out with weights and swims and that he's soft in the belly but now his belly is hard. It's the type of language which would be attributable to somebody of a much younger age. And they're sort of lightly flirting with one another, and there's a sense of humour to this sequence, which is all going to take a turn shortly as Mitch picks Blanche up. Guess how much I weigh, Blanche? Oh, I'd say in the vicinity of 180. Guess again, not that much. No, more. Well, you're a tall man and you can carry a good deal of weight without looking awkward. I weigh 207 pounds and I'm 6 feet 1.5 inches tall in my bare feet without shoes on. And that is what I weigh. Stripped. Oh my goodness, she says. It's awe-inspiring. My weight is not a very interesting subject to talk about. Embarrassed. He hesitates for a moment. What's yours? So again, you see with Mitch in terms of the way that he's characterized, especially in comparison to somebody like Stanley, who exudes that sort of attitude of alpha masculinity, that Mitch has this naivety and innocence to him. Mitch has this childishness to him, and he's not exactly the smoothest talker, let's say, and his flirtation lacks the sort of adult sexual thrill, if you want, that would be typical, that you've seen, for example, between Stanley and Stella. My weight, yes, guess. Let me lift you. Samson, go on, lift me. This is a key sequence. He comes behind her, puts his hands over her waist, and raises her lightly off the ground. You're as light as a feather. And importantly now, he lowers her, but keeps his hands on her waist. Blanche speaks with an affection of demureness. You may release me now. Huh? I said, unhand me, sir. He fumblingly embraces her. Her voice sounds gently reproving. Now, Mitch, just because Stanley and Stella aren't at home is no reason why you shouldn't behave like a gentleman. Just give me a slap whenever I step out of bounds. So I really like this sequence because you see here, first of all, Mitch's desire for Blanche and the ways in which it is growing, and also it's just tinged with that little bit of aggression. He picks her up and then he won't let her go, keeps her close to him. She asks him twice, release me now. I said, unhand me, sir. And he still fumblingly embraces her. So the third time, no reason why he shouldn't behave like a gentleman, and then he kind of lets go of her. So you see he's just sort of starting to overstep that mark. And it's important for Blanche that Mitch behaves like a gentleman, because that's one of the reasons why she sees him as superior to the others, precisely because he has these gentlemanly qualities. And she's going to reiterate that now when she says, you're a natural gentleman, one of the very few that are left in the world. I don't want you to think that I'm a severe and old maid school teacherish or anything like that. It's just, well, I guess it's just that I have, and a key quote for Blanche, at least in terms of what she's attempting to deceive Mitch over, and that impression of being prim and proper, I guess it is just that I have old-fashioned ideals. She rolls her eyes, knowing he cannot see her face. Mitch goes to the front door. There is a considerable silence between them. Blanche sighs. Mitch coughs self-consciously. Where's Stanley and Stella tonight? They've gone out with Mr. and Mrs. Hubble upstairs. Where did they go? I think they were planning to go to a midnight preview at Lower's State. We should all go together at some night. No, that wouldn't be a good plan. Why not? You're an old friend of Stanley's, okay? So this is why she thinks it wouldn't be a good idea. Because Stanley would be there, and at this stage in the play, Blanche perceives Stanley as an antagonist, somebody who has it out for her. He's confronted her in the scene before this with the idea of a man named Shaw who goes through Laurel and has associated Blanche with the Hotel Flamingo. We was in the 241st together, so Mitch and Stanley had served together in the military. I guess he talks to you frankly, sure. Has he talked to you about me? Oh, not very much. The way you say that, I suspect he has. No, he hasn't said much. But what he has said, what would you say his attitude towards me was? Why do you want to ask that? Well, don't you get along with him, asks Mitch. What do you think? And a key quote for Mitch, I think, in the text, I don't think he understands you. That is putting it mildly. If it weren't for Stella about to have a baby, I wouldn't be able to endure things here. He isn't nice to you. He is insufferably rude, says Blanche. Goes out of his way to offend me. In what way, Blanche? Why? In every conceivable way. So this sequence reveals to you that Mitch believes that he understands Blanche, and therefore that makes them a good fit for one another. But this is contrasting now with Mitch's inability to interpret Blanche's behaviour in the first half of this sequence. You just do whatever you want, he said earlier, unable to interpret her thoughts and actions. Here, he's sort of not making excuses for Stanley, but he is not exactly revealing the full extent of what Stanley has said about Blanche. He's attempting to sweeten the pill, let's say, with this notion that he doesn't understand you. But you do see some genuine concern for Mitch in his questions of, he isn't nice to you, in what way, Blanche, why isn't he nice to you? And Blanche here gives us more evidence for what she dislikes most about Stanley, being insufferably rude, offending her. I'm surprised to hear that, are you? Well, I don't see how anybody could be rude to you. So I'll just highlight this as I go because it's mainly Blanche talking about Stanley. She refers to the entire thing as a frightful situation. There's no privacy here. There's just these three portraits between the two rooms at night. He stalks, adopting it from the stage directions. He stalks through the rooms in his underwear at night, and I have to ask him to close the bathroom door. That sort of commonness isn't necessarily. You probably wonder why I don't move out. Well, I'll tell you frankly, a teacher's salary is barely sufficient for her living expenses. I didn't save a penny last year, so I had to come here for the summer. That's why I have to put up with my sister's husband, and he has to put up with me, apparently so much against his wishes. Surely, he must have told you how much he hates me. I don't think he hates you. He hates me, or why would he insult me? The first time I laid eyes on him, I thought to myself, that man is my executioner. That man will destroy me unless... Blanche. Yes, honey. Can I ask you a question? Yes, what? How old are you? She makes a nervous gesture. Why do you want to know? I talked to my mother about you and she said, how old is Blanche? And I wasn't able to tell her. In scene 9, Mitch will confront Blanche about the fact that he's never seen her in the daylight. He's never really gotten a clear look at her. This incident is revealing Blanche has just been sort of elaborating a lie about why she stays in New Orleans with Stanley and Stella, about her teacher's salary, and so on and so forth, when we know that she's lost her job, or at least it's been heavily implied. We will know that shortly. And I like this notion that he's talked to his mother about Blanche, and you see that she picks up on that straight away. You talked to your mother about me. Yes, why? I told my mother how nice you were, and I liked you. Were you sincere about that? You know I was. Why did your mother want to know my age? Mother is sick. I'm sorry to hear it. Badly. She won't live long. Maybe just a few months. Oh. She worries because I'm not settled. Oh. She wants me to be settled down before she... His voice is hoarse and he clears his throat twice. Okay. These O's of Blanche's, O and O. She won't live long, maybe just a few months. She worries because I'm not settled. So in both of these scenarios, you can see that Blanche relates to what Mitch is talking about. So this notion of the mother not living long. In scene 1, Blanche reveals to us that death is an ugly thing, Miss Stella, right? She'd been there to see her parents die and the last remaining members of Belle Reve take their final breath, so Blanche has an uncomfortable relationship with the idea of death. Her husband has died. And here, Mitch's mum worries because he's not settled. And again, Blanche just responds tersely with an emotive oh, which again shows you that she in some sense sympathizes or empathizes with that position. And this will be crystallized here when she says, "You love her very much, don't you? I think you have a great capacity for devotion." So alongside Mitch's gentlemanly behaviour, this notion of having a great capacity for devotion is another thing which appeals to Blanche in Mitch, because I think Blanche herself sees herself as somebody that also has a great capacity for devotion. There's a lot of key quotes here for Blanche. Mitch clears his throat and nods. I understand what that is. To be lonely, asks Mitch. I love someone too, and the person I loved is lost, right? So she understands him. So funnily enough, he's just said that Stanley doesn't understand her. He's implying that he does. But now we see that Blanche understands Mitch too. She understands the feeling of suffering through the loss of somebody, the feeling of not being settled, the feeling of being lonely. And she starts now to confide in Mitch for the final sequence of this scene some information about her dead husband. Dead, she crosses to the window and sits on the sill looking out. She pours herself another drink. A man? Okay, now we go into this long speech of Blanche's, which takes us into the end of this sequence. So I'll just highlight for you the key things that relate to her story of Alan Gray and his death. So he was a boy, just a boy, and I was a very young girl. So that's when their marriage first took place, and things like the young collector now and the repetition of young, the 17-year-old boy from the school. You can see that something's being said here about Blanche's relationship with men and how it's sort of stuck in a certain time. She was 16. I made the discovery, love, all at once and much, much too completely. So in other words, what she's suggesting here is that she fell quite deeply in love at a young age, an inexperienced age, with a boy. It was like you had suddenly turned a blinding light on something that had always been in the shadow. That's how it struck the world for me. But I was unlucky, deluded. And now euphemisms. There was something different about the boy. A nervousness, a softness, and tenderness, which wasn't like a man's. Although he wasn't the least bit effeminate looking, still that thing was there. So naturally the implication here is of homosexuality. Euphemisms are employed on the stage. That thing that's there is dehumanizing, something different about him. Adjectives like nervousness, softness, and tenderness have that implication, that archaic implication with them of somebody that doesn't have the type of masculinity of a Stanley. He wasn't the least bit effeminate looking, she says, but it was still there. So that's our biggest sort of clue of what she's talking about. He came to me for help. I didn't know that. I didn't find out anything till after our marriage, when we'd run away and come back, and all I knew was I'd failed him in some mysterious way and wasn't able to give him the help he needed, but couldn't speak of. So of course he couldn't speak of the help because homosexuality was outlawed at the time. He's now married, repressed. He was in the quickstands and clutching at me, but I wasn't holding him out. I was slipping in with him. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything except I loved him unendurably, but without being able to help him or help myself. Then I found out, in the worst of all possible ways, by coming suddenly into a room that I thought was empty, which wasn't empty, but had two people in it. The boy I had married, and an older man who had been his friend for years. So again, there will be textual variations between the annotated version that I'm providing you and the Penguin edition, which you have in front of you, and that happens for a number of reasons. Typically speaking, it will happen because of editions which have changed the script or added dialogue on the stage. So for example, on my edition here, she talks about the boy I had married, an older man who'd been his friend for years. That's been added. In your Penguin edition, it will probably say something like, by coming suddenly into a room that I thought was empty, which wasn't empty but had two people in it, and then the locomotive goes by and that final bit isn't added. So I would use your version, but you can see here that the sequence itself is laying out for you the betrayal and hurt and trauma which Blanche experienced. It's commenting on the nature of being a homosexual man in an era which repressed, censored, and indeed criminalized that type of sexuality. She's talking about her feelings of loss and naivety in love. She's relating to Mitch. It's full of nice sequences and key quotations, metaphors like slipping in, herself, that she herself was being lost in her relationship. The locomotive is heard approaching outside. She clasps her hand to her ears and crouches over. Afterwards, we pretended that nothing had been discovered. Yes, the three of us drove out to Moonlake Casino, very drunk, laughing all the way. And now the polka music, which is associated with Alan Gray, returns. Only she can hear it. We danced the Vesuviana. Suddenly, in the middle of the dance, the boy I had married broke away from me and ran out of the casino. A few moments later, a shot. The polka stops abruptly. So you'll see that she will reveal to us shortly what it was that she said to him, which is important. The polka stops in her mind. Blanche rises. I ran out, all ran and gathered about the terrible thing at the edge of the lake. That's his body. I couldn't get near for the crowding. Then somebody caught my arm. Don't go any closer. Come back. You don't want to see. See what? See what? Then I heard voices. Alan, the grey boy. He'd stuck the revolver into his mouth and fired so that the back of his head had been blown away. She sways and covers her face. It was because, on the dance floor, unable to stop myself, I'd suddenly said, again, I saw it might say I know in your edition. It usually is no, I know, you disgust me. And I think, importantly, this notion of disgust being attached to homosexuality, but also you have to temper it constantly by being aware of the fact that it's not just his homosexuality which disgusted her, but it's also the fact that he was having an affair. And then the searchlight which had been there turned on the world was turned off again, and never for one moment has there been any light that's stronger than this kitchen candle. Mitch gets up awkwardly and moves towards her a little. The polka music increases. Mitch stands beside her, and key quotes for Mitch: "You need somebody, I need somebody too. Could it be you and me, Blanche?" She stares at him vacantly for a moment, then with a soft cry huddles in his embrace. She makes a sobbing effort to speak, but the words won't come. And then, without asking, notably, he kisses her forehead and her eyes, and finally her lips, but no asking. The polka tune fades out. Her breath is drawn and released in long, grateful sobs. So these long, grateful sobs are then typified by her exclamation, "Sometimes there's God so quickly." And at the end of this sequence, having laid out the trauma that she experienced with the loss of her husband, we see that Mitch here now has been framed as this great symbol of hope for Blanche. He's her means of starting a new life and a new marriage and a new relationship, of escaping New Orleans and Stanley. Her exclamation that there's God so quickly is another one of those famous final lines of Blanche for a scene. And Mitch as well acknowledges that Blanche has been through something traumatic and she needs somebody. He needs somebody too. The question, could it be you and me, Blanche? Everything at this moment in the play is poised to create that false sense of hope and the promise of a better life for both of these characters. And in the next two scenes, you'll see that our antagonist Stanley will come along and make sure that the rug is pulled from underneath this foundation.